Hey, what's going on everybody? This is G The Hypersapien, and in this video we're going to do a how to paint Gorzag Gitstomper. So first we start with the base coats. I've got Warboss green, but you can use any darkish sort of green tone here from any brand. So I've added medium to these base coats just so it applies a lot more smooth. And this is going to need a couple of coats of this. So just try your best not to get it on the clothes and everywhere else, but because it's so thinned down, it doesn't matter, we can go over it with the base coat, but it just saves a bit of cleanup for later on. So now you can see I'm putting on the second layer of this base coat, and it just makes that skin a lot more visible. So now you can see I'm putting on the second layer of this base coat, and it's just taken away that translucent look that I had from how thin the paint was. You're not seeing that undercoat as much. So now I'm just putting the base coat down for all the leathery parts and the skull, anything that's going to be brown or those sort of colours. So I'm using Rhinox hide. You can use any dark chocolatey sort of colour brown. We're just going to build some highlights or some brighter colours on top of this, but we want to keep that dark brown in all the recesses. And it's just nice to put this down over the undercoat just so it lays a nice foundation for all these colours that we're going to put on top. Now I do try to keep away from all the parts that are going to be metal though. So I did this little bracelet part around his arm. I did this sandry dust, and off camera I did all the furry parts Corvus black. You can use any black that's sort of got a bit of grey in there. Now I wanted the ammo crate to have a sort of military green look to it, so I used Castellan green, but you can use any military type green that you may have in your collection. Now I want to do all the metal parts here. I use Leadbelcher Air. I like how thinned down this paint is. You can use standard Leadbelcher or any sort of silvers. Now it is going on quite bright here, that's just because of the white zenithal that I did. Now you just want to go over everything now with black wash. I used Knolled oil. You can use any black wash that you may have. So we're just going to slap this on and go over all the base coats. So that's why I got all the base coats done first, because I'm going to use this black wash to darken, make everything a little bit more grim dark, but add some shadows in that skin, in the skin folds and in the fabric. All those folds we're going to add and darken that up. So we just go round and do all of this. I did try to keep away from the sandry dust little bracelet around his arm, because normally I put Agrax over sandry dust. So now I'm going to show you how I do the skin layers. Now I use a few different greens here, so I did chuck the paints on screen if you want to copy. I will put the paints that I use in the description box as well, just so you can have a look. Now the only paint you may not have out of these, if you have Citadel, I do use the really old school 90s Goblin Green, just for a bit of fun. But you can use any paints that have this similar tone. You may get a bit different results obviously, but at the end of the day it's just darker greens going up to a lighter green. So I'm just putting on that dark green. So this was the actual base coat that I used initially, but I'm going to go round and just go over all the skin just to make it more smooth again, or just take away some of the shadow in the areas on top, the top layers, the muscles. But I wanted to keep some of that dark in the recesses, of course. So I'm going over the skin here. I'm trying to go over the big bulge of all the muscles over him, and just put down a really nice, a few thin layers I'll use. But I didn't do it obviously all on camera. Watch and kind of work out how many layers you want to do until you're happy. But I do probably maybe 3 or 4 layers of this just over the areas, just really thin down glazes basically. We just go over all the details here. So we're going over the fingers. We're just trying to give them a bit more definition, just break them apart from that shadow. So this is going to be the darkest color we use. So some areas like this I may not have done as many layers, but we go over all the muscles just to take away some of the staining that the wash may have caused. I mean, it does give it a nice look to the skin, because skin it obviously isn't always smooth, but it's just the look I'm going for. It's the style that I've created with my last Gorkamorka Games Day knob. I sort of practiced on that miniature until I was happy to paint Gorzag. But as you can see, I've gone over the rib cages and areas like that, leaving that shadow, but then adding those layers. But I've only gone over the raised areas, so the actual parts that look like where the ribs are underneath, left that shadow in there as well. But as you can see, the more I do it, it sort of brightens it up and brings it a bit more to life. But it's always nice to work out what parts you want to leave shaded, so I leave that part of his stomach around his belly button, I guess. I don't know why they have belly buttons, an orc, really. I guess that's where they're attached to the pod. But anyway, we start working on the face, so you can see I do like little dashes and lines around his lip, just to add a bit of definition, a bit of wear and tear. And I do the same on his upper lip. So you want to just leave bits of shadow in between and just add a bit more character to him, not just have all these flat areas. So I go around his lips, do his stomach, I do obviously the top of his ears, I'm doing around the good old stomach again, his beer gut. Too much fungus ale, I guess. Now with these layers I start adding the next highlight on the next brighter green to the glaze. And what I'm doing here is I'm adding just a dark green under where all the shadows are going to be. So under his arm is going to be dark green, and a little bit under where the light's not really going to hit. So under his arm, but also on his body that's under his arm. Now I've added some of that Elysian green into the mix, just to make it a little bit more earthy, make it a little bit more natural green. But I start adding as well, each time I highlight, I keep on adding little bits of goblin green into this mix as well. But I do the same thing here, I just go over all the raised areas with this colour, but we want to leave that shadow of the previous colours that we've used in all the cracks and all those areas. So you can see I'm basically just doing the same process over and over. And the paint's not too thick, it's obviously quite thinned down, so it's just glazing in a way. But what we do on the muscles and those areas, even the chest here, we want to put it in between the last colour. So we've got all these layers building up, so you want to put it kind of next to the last layer that you put in. So you want to have a slow transition of the really dark in the middle, and then the next base coat that we've used, and then the next layer on top of that, and then the next layer. So you can see that it blends in, like on the ribcage there, the colours blended in more after it's dry. But we're just going to go over those raised areas again with this mix. But we're just going to keep on building up those layers with the next brightest green. And I normally always mix them a little bit, the last colour and the new green, just so it's not as huge of a jump. So now I'm going to show you putting this brighter green on top of what we've had. So yet again, I'm trying to go in between all of the other colours. So we're going to try and leave some of that last layer. And that's what it kind of looks like once it's dried. Blends in a little bit more. But we're just going to do a few more of these layers. Just build up that colour a little bit more. We're just going to keep on slowly add in this brighter green, which is kind of a mix of a few of those greens now. As I say, I keep on adding the brighter green to the mix, so this would be a few of those greens now, but adding more and more of this goblin. But the more and more we do these layers, we're just trying to go over these raised areas, so the knuckles and all these areas, the folds of the skin, but we're still working on those muscles and the actual skin of the orc. So you can see again, I'm adding another little layer of this mix over these areas. It just helps smooth it out, but also I do add a few lines here and there because I do want this orc skin to have a little bit of a rough area here and there. So we're going over the lips again, and you can see it's starting to brighten up this skin tone and get it more to where I want it to be. So I do like dark orc flesh, but that's not the idea or the scheme I'm going with here. I plan to do a dark skin tutorial or video. But as you can see, the more I add these bright highlights or these bright layers, it's getting closer to how I want the skin tone to look. Now this technique does take time, and obviously if you don't use the exact same paints that I use, you'll get slightly different results, but it's okay, because if I were, say, to do a few troops this sort of style, I'd want to add slightly different colours to them, because you don't really want all the orcs to be the same. I know some people just do the same scheme all throughout their army or their war, but I mean humans and most animals and whatnot, they don't all have the exact same colours to them. You can see I start adding some lines here on some of the muscle. I just want to give it a bit of texture so it's not all flat. So you can see just above his wrist there, I've added a few little lines, so it's kind of leaving a bit of that dark layer underneath. I do it here as well. You can see I'm sort of doing just little stippling to just add in some texture, because I mean if you're really ripped, your skin's not going to be, it's going to show the muscle underneath, the muscle fibers. That's sort of the idea I'm going with here. But I mean, if you do sort of follow this idea or this painting video, you can do what you want. You can make it more smooth, you can add even more texture and stuff to it. Now I'm just going over the face again here, going around all those details with this brighter skin tone or this brighter green mix that I'm using. But as you can see, it was in a sort of messy stage, but it's starting to get to that point where it's starting to come together more. We've got the dark shadow, we've got the brighter skin tone looking quite nice. There's not a bad transition in between. Just going around his eyes. It's actually hard to do on camera, I guess just the way it's set up, but I even do the eyelids under the orc, which I was quite happy with. You can sort of see it there. I just touch it and do the eyelids. I use a military colour wash, a Phonian Camo shade. I know other brands have this military sort of green wash. Now sometimes for this stage I'll use Plague Bearer Flesh contrast for this glaze wash stage, but I thought I'd use a Phonian Camo shade. I have used this before. It's gonna make that skin not as bright, but it's also gonna sort of help blend all these layers together, just so there's not much of a huge transition from one to the other, not as big of a jump. And I feel it's going to make the skin look a little bit more natural as well. But that's what the skin looks like after we've done all those stages. But you can basically add more layers on top of this if you want, and then if it gets too bright you can add another wash over the areas. and you can kind of go back and forth until you're happy. But I just wanted to show you sort of the initial stage of how I do the skin, so it might change a little bit. If I'm not happy with it, I can just add more glazes. Now I'm going to do a part 2 video for Gorzag, and in that video I'm going to do his clothing, and I'm going to do all the metal parts and any other parts that I may have missed on this one, all the small details. But on this video, part 1, I wanted to do all the base coats, which are quite easy and obvious. I wanted to do the skin and show you how I did the skin on him. So I didn't want the video to go for too long, that's why I'm going to split it into 2 parts. But yeah, if you enjoy this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe. I'd appreciate it if you drop a comment, let me know how you feel about this video, if you enjoyed it, if you're going to give maybe this scheme a go. Now, as I said before, I've got a few other orc schemes that I'm going to do, well, quite a few different ones that I plan to do. But as always, this was G The Hypersapien, and I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.